On Tuesday morning, Mark Carney stood before reporters on Parliament Hill and delivered a message intended for an audience of one. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had just appeared on Fox News the night before, claiming that in a phone call with President Trump, the Canadian Prime Minister had been very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made at Davos. Carney's response was immediate and unambiguous. To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the President, I meant what I said in Davos. 8 days earlier, Carney had delivered a speech that shook the global order. Now he was refusing to let it be rewritten. The speech in question arrived at the World Economic Forum on January 20th, delivered to a room of global leaders and business executives who had grown accustomed to platitudes and carefully hedged diplomatic language. Carney gave them neither. He opened by declaring that the world was witnessing a rupture in the world order, the end of a nice story, and the beginning of a brutal reality where geopolitics among the great powers is not subject to any constraints. He did not name Donald Trump. He did not need to. For 17 minutes, Carney dismantled the fiction of the rules-based international order that Western powers had championed for decades. He acknowledged its hypocrisies. He admitted that the strongest had always exempted themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. And then he declared what leaders had been unwilling to say aloud. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We're in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. The room gave him a standing ovation. Standing ovations are rare at Davos. What Carney articulated was not merely criticism of American policy, it was a declaration of strategic independence. He called for middle powers to unite against economic coercion from great powers that have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination, he said. Middle powers must act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. Trump responded the following day from the same stage. His message was direct. Canada lives because of the United States. They should be grateful to us, Canada. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your remarks. The escalation that followed was swift and punishing. On Thursday, Trump revoked Canada's invitation to join his Board of Peace, the initiative he had formed to oversee reconstruction in Gaza. Carney had already left Davos without meeting the president. He was in Quebec City, delivering a national unity address in which he doubled down. Canada doesn't live because of the United States, Carney said. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. On Saturday, Trump issued his most severe threat yet. If Canada proceeded with its trade deal with China, he would impose a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. He continued to refer to Carney as Governor Carney, the same diminutive he had used for Justin Trudeau. If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. The tariff threat was extraordinary. Canada and the United States share the largest bilateral trade relationship in the world. A 100% tariff would effectively sever that relationship overnight. It would devastate supply chains, spike consumer prices on both sides of the border, and create economic chaos across North America. Carney's response was to clarify, but not to retreat. Canada was not pursuing a comprehensive free trade agreement with China, he explained. What Ottawa had negotiated was a limited arrangement addressing specific disputes. Chinese tariffs on Canadian agricultural products would be reduced. Canada's 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles would be lowered. The deal was, Carney argued, entirely consistent with the USMCA. But Carney also made clear that Canada would continue diversifying its trade relationships. In the 10 months since taking office, his government had negotiated 12 new trade deals across 4 continents. This was not a reaction to Trump. It was the central policy priority of his administration, a deliberate effort to reduce Canada's economic dependence on a neighbour that had proven itself unpredictable. The phone call between Carney and Trump on Monday lasted approximately 30 minutes. Both sides described it as productive. But what happened afterward revealed the chasm between their interpretations. Bessent appeared on Sean Hannity's programme that evening and portrayed Carney as chastened. "I was in the Oval Office with the president today. He spoke to Prime Minister Carney, who was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made at Davos. By Tuesday morning, Carney was standing before cameras in Ottawa, rolling his eyes at the suggestion. To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. It was clear. Canada was the first country to understand the change in US trade policy that he had initiated, and we're responding to that." He then added, in French, a line that captured the Canadian position with unusual bluntness. "The world has changed. Washington has changed. There is almost nothing normal in the US now, and that's the truth." The polling data suggests Canadians agree. According to the Angus Reid Institute, Carney's approval rating jumped 8 points in the week following his Davos speech, reaching 60%. A separate survey from Liaison Strategies put it at 62%. His Liberal Party now leads the opposition Conservatives by 8 points. 3/4 of Canadians believe free trade benefits their economy, up 10% from the previous year, the largest increase among 30 countries polled. Only 16% favour outright protectionism. The Davos speech did not create this sentiment. It channeled it. For more than a year, Canadians have watched Trump refer to their country as a potential 51st state, threaten escalating tariffs, post altered maps showing Canada absorbed into American territory, and demean their leaders with calculated disrespect. The response has not been capitulation. It has been a hardening of national identity and a growing appetite for economic independence. Carney understood this when he wrote the speech himself. He understood that the moment demanded honesty about the world as it actually exists, not nostalgia for an order that was already dying. He opened with a metaphor from Václav Havel about a shopkeeper who places a sign in his window proclaiming, "Workers of the world, unite," not because he believes it, but to signal compliance, to avoid trouble, to get along. Havel called this living within a lie. Carney's argument was that the Western Alliance had been living within its own version of this lie for decades. The rules-based order was never as rules-based as its champions claimed. The strongest exempted themselves. The benefits were distributed unevenly. And now the pretense had been stripped away entirely. "The old order is not coming back," Carney declared. "We should not mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But from the fracture, we can build something better, stronger, more just." The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace analysed the speech as uncharacteristically candid, both for Davos and a Canadian, noting that Carney laid out, for all to hear, the catastrophic implications of Washington's current policies for global order, and signalled that at least one erstwhile ally is prepared not only to hedge against an unpredictable and predatory United States, but if need be, to balance against it. Former Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae, compared its significance to Louis Saint Laurent's Grey Lecture of 1947, the speech that defined Canada's post-war international role. Alexander Stubb, president of Finland, called it one of the best speeches we've heard here in Davos this week. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said it was evidence that Canada is back as a global leader. The praise was not universal. Some commentators noted that Carney had benefited from the failures of the rules-based order for his entire career as a central banker, and had only acknowledged its collapse once the collapse threatened Canada directly. Others questioned whether his rhetorical boldness would translate into meaningful policy shifts, or whether it was merely a performance designed to distinguish himself from Trump on the world stage. But the political effect was undeniable. Carney had positioned himself as the face of resistance to Trump's new world order, the leader willing to name what others would not, the voice articulating a path forward for countries that found themselves caught between great powers, increasingly willing to use economic force to achieve their aims. Trump, meanwhile, saw his own approval decline. A Reuters Ipsos poll released the same day as Carney's defiant press conference found Trump's approval rating at 38%. Tied for the lowest of his second term. The decline coincided with mounting criticism of his administration's immigration enforcement operations in Minneapolis, where 2 American citizens had been killed by federal agents in 3 weeks. The contrast was stark. One leader had his approval surge by telling his people uncomfortable truths. The other had his approval sink while insisting that those truths were lies. The question now is what happens next. The USMCA, the trade agreement that governs commerce between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, is scheduled for mandatory review in July 2026. That review will determine whether the framework that has governed North American trade survives, or whether it is torn apart and renegotiated under terms far more favourable to Washington. Carney has made clear that Canada will negotiate, but it will not negotiate from a position of dependency. The 12 trade deals signed in his first 10 months represent the beginning of an effort to reduce Canada's reliance on American markets. Future agreements with India, the European Union, and other partners are being actively pursued. Trump has made equally clear that he views this diversification as a threat, not a legitimate expression of Canadian sovereignty. His 100% tariff threat was designed to signal that any move toward China would be met with devastating retaliation. His dismissal of Carney as governor was designed to remind Canadians that their leader is, in Trump's view, subordinate to the American president. Bessent's claim that Carney had walked back his Davos remarks was designed to undermine the Prime Minister's credibility and create the impression that Canada had already blinked. Carney's response was designed to make clear that Canada had not blinked and would not blink. "I meant what I said in Davos." 6 words. They carried the weight of everything that has changed in the relationship between these two countries, everything that is still being contested, and everything that will be decided in the months ahead. The old order is not coming back. That much is certain. What replaces it depends on whether middle powers like Canada can translate rhetorical defiance into structural independence, whether alliances forged in crisis can endure beyond the crisis, and whether the countries caught between great powers can build something durable before the next rupture arrives. Carney has staked his political future on the belief that they can. Trump has staked his on the belief that they cannot. One of them will be proven right. The other will be remembered as the leader who misread the moment. For now, the Canadian Prime Minister is standing before cameras, rolling his eyes at the suggestion that he retreated, and telling anyone who will listen that he said exactly what he meant. The world is watching to see what happens when he is forced to prove it.